Hello and welcome to the aForm show. My name is Alan George.
And my name is Tisha Rao.
Each week, we sit across from thought leaders and change makers in the architecture and design space of the GCC.
We dive deep into their professional and personal experiences to find out what makes them really tick.
Our goal is to add value to your day and make you all much better architects and designers overall.
Finally, the views and opinions of the guests do not necessarily represent the aForm show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. On this week's episode, we are joined by Arjan Pit, Managing Director of UNStudio, Dubai. Arjan completed his education at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands and has since developed an extensive portfolio of work across Europe, China, and the Middle East, having lived and worked in multiple parts of the world, which we are definitely going to get into. He has a broad interest in understanding of cultural diversity. He pushes sustainability and the shaping of the future city in intrinsically different ways. Locally, he has been part of many groundbreaking projects here in the region, most notably the Wasl Tower on Sheikh Zayed Road. We are very, very excited to have him on the show with us today and look forward to delve deep into his design manifesto. So without further ado, let's get into it. Good morning, Arjan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's good to talk a little bit more about architecture and the vision on the city in general.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So just off air, I know that we have a list of things that we want to talk about, but I think our conversation off air was so interesting that we should just carry it on. So you were kind of telling us about your history, kind of traveling the world, being a globetrotter for architecture. If you can maybe distill that for our listeners, kind of what made you want to go to different places?
Well, but what made me go to different places is kind of the idea that architecture can be executed everywhere and that the experiences you have in different countries can only contribute to a better understanding of the world, of different cultures and how they treat architecture and how you can, as an architect, contribute to the built environment, basically, not only keep it from your own perspective, trying to involve different perspectives and ideas. And I think living in these different countries, my mind is basically broadened and wider, open to all kind of influences and ideas.
Right. So because you've, seen so many projects, been part of so many projects across the world, some of those regions being, pioneers in but actually building sustainable architecture. Dubai as a city, like we discussed again off air, is maybe just catching up now and is maybe not at the world standard of what real sustainable architecture is. However, if you kind of look back at the history of the region, there was a very strong vernacular that was present, which, responded to the environment and so on. So from your point of view, I want to understand in the global scale of things, where does Dubai actually fall at the moment in terms of sustainable architecture? Do you think that we're getting there, not there, still have a long way to go? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's still a long way to go, especially in the bigger developments where you can see that the capital expenditure in these projects is focused on the building itself, not so much on new technologies or the integration of sustainable technologies, where actually the operational expenses can be lower and can be better and also better for the environment to create a healthier lifestyle and healthier environment. So I think there is a big portion where we can think and rethink a little bit about how do we design facades? How do we integrate new technologies which make a building more sustainable? And that doesn't always mean to introduce like solar on the building, but think on a holistic way. How can we make a facade perform better? So you don't need this kind of cooling, or how can you inspire or encourage people to not use the car? So these kind of elements, these are kind of in Europe, they developed that a lot, right? And I'm coming from a country where basically the choice is always the bike and then the car. So you do everything by bike. And I think that if we start there without introducing these technologies, I think there's a big gap to fill still here in this region. And of course, if we look outside now, it's way too hot to do outdoor activities, but we could think about different types of mobilities as well, right? That you can have the electrical taxis or, more smaller and individual mobility almost, which can be better. And in terms of buildings, I think the greenery, this can also contribute to a better environment and more sustainable. And if you want to, have a building not producing, but using sustainable energy, I think you can do it in two ways. You can do it individual development. So put solar on the roofs, using the right colors, making a building more performative. But you could also do it like centralized, where we can see in the desert, we have now this huge solar plant, basically. And I think that's one of the two options where we can really go, and they can work hand in hand, of course.
Right. We have had a guest on the show before, a facade designer, actually quite a few of them, that kind of keep bringing the argument of buildings should not be power generators. They said that you should kind of, if you want to do that correctly, then something like a solar farm in the desert makes sense, and that's its purpose. And if you want to kind of bring that into an architectural facade, that may not be the best thing. They cite technology being the big problem, that panels just aren't as efficient as they should be in order to actually facilitate the energy that something like a tower needs. Is that something that you agree with?
Partially, but like UNStudio has this product which is called Solar Visuals. We are UNStudio is partially owner of this company, and where we kind of try to integrate both, like making a facade, which is the enclosure of the building, which you always need. And within this enclosure, there is, you can generate power. Right. So if you combine the two, you don't need to add something, but you use what's already there. So make the facade performative. And I think there, I kind of disagree with it. But if you go with the more traditional way of construction, yes, then it's better to do it centralized and make the facade itself as good as possible, performing the best to the climate, and also be considerate about the climate we live in, right? The use of glass could be reduced, the use of dark colors, or maybe you could use dark colors, but then they do something with these dark colors. So you maybe use pipes in a dark facade where you make hot water, right? So you use something which you always need for a building, is a facade, and utilize that to generate energy or use it in a different way.
Okay. Maybe at this point, I can ask Tishia as well, because you've done a bunch of work in India, for example. India, of course, being a very different market as compared to what we are in at the moment. What do you see as sustainable architecture over there? What are people kind of pushing at the moment there?
Yeah, with contemporary buildings, if you're looking at general residential or like mixed use developments, now there's been a lot of people are adopting the whole LEED certificate system, and, anything where you can kind of rate buildings against and get this certification. But on a more public scale, I don't think it still has a long way to go in terms of advertising buildings as sustainable. That's something that I don't think the public is still very knowledgeable or aware about. The other thing that, especially if you go to like 2-tier cities, like, in Gujarat and in like other states, let's say not maybe Delhi or like Maharashtra or Mumbai, for instance, a lot of vernacular architecture is coming back because these are much smaller developments. And so people kind of want to see that culture being inherited again in wherever they're living.
Fair enough.
So they have a long, long way to go. I think that's the summary of it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think part of the sustainability is not only environmental sustainability, it's also the social sustainability, right? How is the perception, but also how can people live healthier lifestyles, and how do we use our environment? And that's in the social aspect as well, where I think if we talk about where we live now, Dubai, where the cohesion of neighborhoods might also be improved by, doing interventions into these developments where people have a social kind of interaction with each other, live together, a healthier lifestyle. And that's then social sustainability in that sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think this is something which I'm sure everyone listening has seen already. The 2040 master plan, this 60% green areas master plan, which again, for someone like myself, who's, sort of seen this city over the last 3 decades, 60% of greenery sounds really good. I mean, I remember as a child, like I used to walk in, blinding sun for, long periods of time. But anyway, I'm not jaded. We love Dubai. The point is that I think brings up a very interesting topic, which you touched upon, which is we sort of have these islands, as you said, next to each other. And the only thing that connects these islands are the highways. So in a sense, like you said, the urban plan was sort of made for the car and not necessarily for the person. But I think with this new master plan, because it needs to be so green and so connected, I think these interventions can happen. I'm curious to hear from you, what kind of interventions do you see happening? Do you see these as formal structures? Do you see these as more, sort of common public spaces? Do you see this as, maybe just infrastructure, maybe not even anything architecture related? What's the kind of vision that you see?
Well, I would surely hope that it's common public space, public realm, which people can use in the way they kind of want, right? And connecting different islands, which we have now. We deal with what we have at the moment. We can, of course, in the future developments, rethink that notion. These islands can be better connected by pedestrian ways or cycling paths and all these kind of things, and bridges which are more accessible for everyone. So I hope it's more public realm than that it's private or you have to pay an entrance fee or anything like that. It's public, which you can use in different ways. It can be used for events. It can be used for just a barbecue in the park and these kind of elements to it. And these interventions, I think we have to really think about how can we connect them to each other, that everyone has even access to it. Not that it's just an attractor for a certain portion of the city.
Like it's not a marketing scheme for something.
Exactly. It's something which is permanent, which stays there, which is for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think that will then also tie the whole city together in a way that
kind of like nodes, like something that's connecting different parts.
Exactly. And on these parts, you can have different events, right? So it's also very attractive. So there's also a generation of revenue basically from this. So it's not only, you don't only have to invest, it also will give you something, and not only in the social way, but also in more revenue way.
Right.
So I think this combination, which we're always dealing with within architecture, is like the social aspects of architecture. What is our ideal approach to a city? Mm-hmm. But also how can you make a city profitable and livable? So that is also attractive for investors.
Right.
And hopefully investors will see the value of this public realm.
Right. Okay. Then I may just want to ask something a bit specific, because this is the first, I'm sure you've pitched a lot of projects to people in the region here. The very first thing that faces resistance is obviously the cost, the so-called return on investment. As a developer, do I actually make money off this? What do you think would be an incentive for developers to want to do these kind of works? How do they actually, what is their incentive basically to do this?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, because what is the incentive for a developer to more or less spend more money on something they might not see the direct return on in money as well, in revenue? I think it's first of all, it's kind of an idealism, but on the other hand, you could also think like with the facade, right? Every building has a roof. Maybe some buildings have an accessible roof, which is accessible for everyone. Mm-hmm. And on this roof, you might have a coffee shop, or, you have a kind of public barbecue, or you have someone cooking for you on the barbecue. So it can be more activated roof.
Right.
Which contributes again to the sustainability of the building as well.
Right.
So there's these kind of incentives, I think, to have a more holistic approach to different projects. And I know for high rise, it will be a bit more difficult. For residential, it will be more difficult, because you don't want to really get this pure integration of public and private, right? That's not what you want. But for example, the building in Melbourne, which will start soon, is kind of an avenue in the city, which then goes into the building. So you can literally walk up to the building and you can use that space. So the public space or the private space become public, and then you have two towers going up.
Right.
And this kind of integration is a good approach to it. And this incentive for the developer is there because they attract more people. So their footfall is way higher because people want to see it, and then they see that there are shops, or they want to live there, or whatsoever. I think that's how you can think about building more as a a machine almost.
Right.
Looking back at Corbusier, that it's like more interacting with the city than that it's an island on itself.
Okay. All right. If I may then ask, another very obvious problem that everyone seems to bring up rather, is the temperature that we have in the summer here. People say that, the city is only walkable for about 6 months. I would argue it's probably about 8 or 9 maybe. And yeah, maybe now, the June, July, August is where it really kicks in. I am not advocating that anyone should be outdoors at those temperatures. But in your mind, do you see any kind of architectural intervention, kind of like these nodes, Tisha, as you were talking about earlier? Is there something which can be designed to kind of counteract this?
I think there is at least some interventions we can do indeed. And that's shading is a very big thing, and shading can be done by trees. It doesn't have to be built. It can be a combination of this. It can also be that these nodes have bodies of water in it, which can even be cooled, as long as it's cooled sustainably. My opinion is always you can basically put air conditions outside, as long as it's if it's solar powered, for example.
Right.
If we don't use oil and petrol for this kind of things, then it's fine. That's my personal opinion. It's not the most common opinion, but no, I think we can extend a little bit this time where we can stay outside by introducing very smart interventions, using materials, using facades which have less of the effect of the urban island heating, let's say. So there are some pretty smart inventions we can do. It's not easy because it's extremely hot here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if you compare it to, for example, Europe, where it's in Netherlands, especially, where it's raining almost all the time, people go outside. And then you have the cold weather in the winter, people go outside. And it's easier to dress for cold weather and wet weather than for heat. But there are definitely things we can do with these islands, with these nodes, where we can make a healthier and more pleasant environment where we can stay outside longer. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So for designers listening in, there's your challenge. I think that as designers living in this city, I think that's something we all need to think about on some level, for sure. If I can maybe pivot to another topic, UNStudio as a firm is clearly well known worldwide. I don't think there's anyone who probably has not heard of them or not seen their work, been part of them, and so on. The Dubai studio is a bit of a new one, I would think. I mean, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, just kind of setting the stage. Could you then maybe walk us through how, the Dubai studio happened, maybe some of the works that you guys are doing here, anything of that nature?
Yeah, no, it's we're quite new here. We started to think about setting up an office in 2020. It was just before actually the whole pandemic started.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, it is, but I will get back to that in a bit. We started to think about UNStudio as a whole to expand globally and, share our knowledge to a broader public and broader developers. And I think the exposure of UNStudio is very well, like you said, but I think we can contribute a lot to the built environment. Not only the buildings itself, but also the technology which we put efforts we put into it. So we started like a year ago, or a bit over a year ago, to think about how can we do that. And Dubai, of course, since we're doing here the Wassel Tower, which is under construction, we had people here on the ground with a lot of knowledge of how to make buildings, how to do architecture, and how to have the connections with not only developers, but also with contractors and subcontractors and so on. And we saw that there's so much going on, and the contribution which we could give in different fields. We thought about like agriculture, indoor farming, vertical farming, but also the public space, which we discussed earlier. So all the topics which we thought we could build here, which we could do here, are in this region because there's so much development going on, and it's now the additional layer we can put to these different cities here. So that was the start. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and we were like, actually, it makes also sense from that point of view, because you're closer to the clients, to the people who understand the market better than someone who's probably in Amsterdam, right? So you can have a face-to-face conversation, even in a pandemic almost. You just wear your mask and you can talk to each other. And you cannot fly from Amsterdam into Dubai. So actually it made even more sense to do that because you're close to the people and you understand each other. You live in the same bubble nowadays.
Yeah.
So that made sense. And I think the projects which we're doing or which we're focusing on also show that these kind of elements. We focus a lot on cultural projects, on residential buildings, but then with the view on this social sustainability as well. So this is what we're trying to build here. Now it's only 2 people, but we can always tap into the knowledge which is in Amsterdam because we're a global company. We're setting up offices now in the different regions of the world because we think that's a very good way to grow and understand the market better.
Right. Okay. If I may then ask the very obvious question, which is I was someone who studied at the Canadian University down on Sheikh Zayed Road. So I have literally seen the Wasl Tower from its inception, like from its foundation, all the way up to where it is even now. The hot topic that everyone kind of relates to that building is that whole ceramic facade, that it's, kind of this. It looks really nice, I must say. I mean, I have only ever seen the renders and I have seen a few samples that have been mocked up at the moment. Without getting into too much of detail, because I'm sure that's, under a lot of NDAs and things like that. But if you can maybe tell our listeners, what really is the uniqueness of this ceramic facade?
The uniqueness of the ceramic facade. Ceramics has been used for centuries, maybe even millennia, to have a kind of cooling effect. And they use it even on sports cars in their brakes because they're so well in basically getting rid of the heat very quickly.
Right.
So based on that, the heat which gets on the facade, it reflects back and it relates to or reflects back to the environment. And on top of that, we put them on these shading elements. So you already reduce the heat load on the facade by the shading element itself. And every excess heat will be retracted by these ceramic elements.
Right.
Of course, the whole building itself, the first facade, let's say, is glazed and aluminium. But then these shading elements will retract the heat a little bit further from it. Right. And it's quite an ingenious process, where we use also the concept of the pearl industry, which used to be in Dubai. So it's like pearlescent and a bit brownish.
Right.
So it's kind of tying into different aspects of it and using also the environmental conditions here to use the right material for that.
Right. Interesting. Makes a lot of sense. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, I guess that ties into what you were saying earlier about activating that facade to do more than just, I guess, covering up what's in the inside.
Exactly. Yeah. It's performing in a way. It contributes to reduce the heat load.
Right.
And it's not only passive; it's kind of doing it in an active way. Well, of course, it's a non-active material, but it has these characteristics to reduce this heat load. Yeah.
Right. I maybe then want to ask you a bit more specificity when it comes to facades, because you've clearly done, high-rise buildings, multiple areas across the world, multiple climate zones and so on. So something like Dubai, the kind of climate that we're in, the kind of, solar exposure that we get and so on. What kind of facade in your mind do you think would actually be ideal here? Because there are many claims, like we discussed again off air, about, we can just put solar panels on the entire facade and, we can generate electricity, or we can, have these, double screens, which will reduce heat gain and things like that. There's many proposals. There's very few that have been implemented and even fewer that have actually documented and proved that they actually work. So in your mind, because you've done such an extensive portfolio for this region, what kind of facade do you think would actually work?
I think we can look at 2 different ways in this. We have, of course, the vernacular architecture, which deals with the solar very well. The buildings are inward. You have these wind towers. So they use the natural environment in such a way that you can cool or keep the building cool, because that's the main topic and main issue with the buildings here. Using natural materials, solid, heavy materials. This is kind of looking to history, how they did it. And I think indeed the simplest method now is not using all glass buildings. Of course, the glass performs really well nowadays, but it's still, it's still glass and still the sun wants to come in and the heat wants to come in.
Right.
So that's one approach to try to find the best balance between how can you use the facade itself by simple design interventions, like smaller windows, smaller openings, maybe use high performance glass, and maybe indeed use some shading elements, but these shading elements can perform. And I think the other part of it is, how can you make this facade, again, back to the performance, produce something for you, right? We did a proposal for the sustainability pavilion for Expo. And this facade is basically generating water, because the summers here are very humid as well. So if you keep the facade cool, you can see it on your own windows in
you see a lot of condensation.
So you see the condensation. And since you need to cool the building anyways, why not use this to actually generate water from outside, which you can use for your plants, for your gardens, etc. Right? So that's the other more technological way to achieve something without using screens or anything. But if you do it in the right way, this which generates water can also be used as shading elements, right? So it's this kind of holistic thinking of not just as a gadget, but also how can it contribute to the whole building, and how can it contribute to the environment in a way, and how can you use the environment you're in for your gain, basically.
Right.
Not looking at the problem, but trying to work with it to work towards the solution.
Right. Okay. I think that makes sense for a lot of new projects, definitely, because you definitely have a lot of room for experimentation and so on. Do you think there's anything that can be done for existing buildings?
There can be something done for existing buildings to rethink, because some buildings, the building stock here, some are ready for revitalization, maybe only interior, but can also be the facade itself. We can rethink the orientation of the building. So the building has now a certain orientation. What can we do with the facade to inform basically the new facade? I think the project in South Korea, Hanwha, it's an office tower. That's a very good example of it, where it was also very done in a very smart way, because the building was still operational during construction. They did it floor by floor, but the design itself, like the south facade, is smaller openings, deals with the sun, doesn't want to get too much sun inside. But the north facade is more open, and it gets, the light in, but there's no real heat coming from there, because the sun is never in the north, obviously. So these kind of things, if we do revitalize buildings, I think these kind of smart thinking of how to integrate the design into the conditions you're dealing with, and not see one building as 4 facades and they're all the same. Right. So we could deal with the actual orientation of the facade itself.
Right.
And I think, there's good opportunities here to look into certain buildings which are ready for revitalization, or some structures which have been started construction, have been stopped for years and years now. We can rethink what can we do with that as well.
True. Yeah. And we all know there are plenty of those here to be done with. So
no, exactly. And I think that's it. If we talk back to incentives, right, for developers, I think that's a good incentive. We can rethink actually now with the technology which processed or proceeded into what we know now. You can even make the building better than
what it was supposed to be.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of then want to zoom out a bit, maybe outside of facades and buildings generally. Again, because this is a very hot topic, and, everyone is kind of like this mad gold rush for architects. Saudi, is that something of interest to UNStudio at the minute?
Yes, definitely. We do a lot of work there at the moment, and we all know it's now a lot of master planning and generating ideas. What are we going to do? What's the best way to build these mega cities and mega developments? So we are very active in that, because we really see that as an opportunity to build for the future. How can you, how we say it, how can you future-proof the future? Right. So we can, especially these projects there, we can really look ahead. We can really use our knowledge bases, which we built over numerous of decades. Right. How can we utilize that in a sensible way and in a good way? So Saudi is very attractive for us in the way that we can experiment and test and really show that we have the knowledge to build these new cities.
Right. Awesome. I think you're very much on point with kind of what everyone has told us about Saudi. So I think us as the show, we definitely have to visit sometime and go check all this out.
Yeah, definitely.
To kind of like wind down the show, we have a bunch of questions which we wanted to ask you, but we kind of distill it down to one.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a fun question. You don't really have to think too much about it. It is, you know what? I'll let Tisha ask the question. It's the final question.
Yeah, it's the final question. It's basically if you had to choose one person, architect, whether dead or alive, that you'd like to have dinner with, who would that be and why?
That's probably the toughest question as well, because there's so many I would like to talk to. You know, I have admiration for so many previous architects historically, but also, nowadays there's some really good talent and people who think about the built environment. But for me, it's always been Mies van der Rohe. For some reason, I think his attention to detail and his thoughts about, you know, how can we make this kind of very brutal but very detailed buildings. It's like one detail for a whole building. So you think about the big detail, but he was also thinking about the urban environment. How do you make an entrance to a building? How do you not use the street only and then the building is just next to the street, but how can you make a more smooth entrance? So I think how he dealt with these topics was very good. So I would like to sit with a person like that. But then on the other hand, of course, Oscar Niemeyer, great, you know, this guy with so much passion and ideas and what he contributed to the architecture and modernism in general.
Right.
But yeah, and then of course, what I earlier mentioned, Le Corbusier. That's more the thinking of the building and the city as a holistic thing, as a machine, like he.
Right.
But yeah, I think if it's one person and I can only pick one, then who's no longer with us, then it's Mies van der Rohe.
I think that's a brilliant answer, because I think he's one of those architects which were truly an architect. I mean, he did everything. I mean, one of my favorite chairs is the Barcelona chair. And when I tell people an architect designed it, they're like, really? Architects even do that? I'm like, yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what we did. And that's maybe what we should continue to do even. So thank you so much for your answer. Obviously, if anyone from our audience maybe wants to check out your work, check out UNStudio, or maybe even get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to kind of do that?
Well, to get in touch with us, like I said, we're growing. We're actually expanding globally. So I think to get in touch with us now as someone who's very interested in our work and contribute to that, that's welcome, especially now. And that you can go to our website, for example. Currently, we are still looking for a suitable office for UNStudio, which really shows our DNA and what is our presence here. So visiting at the moment that's a bit difficult. But yeah, reach out. You can find the different projects on our website. We are also, you know, posting on Instagram a lot of our projects with some background information, also with people who worked on it, with some statements about people. There's a lot of interviews with Ben van Berkel.
Right.
Who is, by the way, one of those architects who does everything. Right. Buildings, urban plans, door handles, toys for kids or playing elements. So, you know, that ties in a little bit with that. But yeah, you can see all this work on our website and in his talks, and you can see that we're very passionate about architecture. And yeah, please do reach out the way you find on internet or wherever else. Right. And we're always welcome for a talk and an interest.
Awesome.
Great.
Awesome. On that note, Arjan, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I know that you are very, very busy. So we very, very appreciate the time and kind of belief that you're giving towards the show. It means a lot to us. And we will definitely have you on again, I'm sure, in the future.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. And I think it's a great initiative. Like Dubai is a hub for everything.
Right.
And I think it should also be a hub for design. And I think that is kind of also an initiative now with the Al Quoz Creative Zone. I think the creativity here as a young city in a way, I think with young people and like really a hope and a vision for the future that can create so much or inspire so much creativity. And I think this kind of podcast is really a good kind of way of sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, and talking to each other in a very easy way about what are the ideas, what can we do, and for the future, and what we are doing now at the moment. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to come back soon.
Awesome. And on that note, we will catch you guys next week. Fellow aFormers, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being part of our journey, and thank you for the immense support we've been receiving for our episodes. It has and continues to be a very bumpy road, but we wouldn't want it any other way. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought you value, please share this episode with anyone who may benefit from it. But of course, if you loved the episode, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, send us a little DM, and we may just send you a secret link to a secret episode which we've been working on. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See you next time. Keep sketching.